Good morning and hey learners. Today we will be studying about classification, Unit 1.2. Our objectives will be for this lesson to describe Aristotle's classification system and explain why it was replaced, to explain Linnaeus' system of classification and identify the main criterion he used to classify organisms. What are the 7 levels of organization that Linnaeus used to categorize organisms? What criterion do modern taxonomists use to classify an organisms? So let's start with our lesson. The early system of classification. Taxonomy is the branch of biology that names and groups organisms according to their characteristics and evolutionary history. Organisms were first classified more than 2000 years ago by the Greek philosopher Aristotle. Here he is. Aristotle was the first person to classify organisms in the field of biology or taxonomy. He made groups of organisms belonging to same characteristics or having same characteristics, morphological shapes, or the way they look like. So Aristotle didn't go into the detail, he just classified organisms on the basis of their morphological features. The early system of classification. Organisms were grouped into land dwellers. So this is the classification of Aristotle, like how he classified organisms into different groups. The first one he made was the land dwellers, the water dwellers, and the air dwellers. Plants were placed into 3 categories based on the difference in their stems. As new organisms were discovered, his system became inadequate because there were some organisms who were not related to even any of his classification group. So the tragedy occurs or happens with the classification system of Aristotle was that there are some similar characteristics. Organisms having similar characteristics were placed in different groups, and those organisms which have different characteristics were placed in the same groups. So the main points of the failure of Aristotle classification was the categories were not specific enough, like the characteristics of organisms were not specific. Common names did not describe a species accurately. He didn't give some like scientific names or some accurate names to organisms, and at that time, like people call organisms on their local names. So everywhere wherever you go, you will find a new name for the same organisms. Names were long and hard to remember. That's why Aristotle classification system was failed. The modern system are hierarchy, the 7 levels of organization. Carlos Linnaeus in the mid-70s was a Swedish biologist who established a simple system for classifying and naming organisms. He developed a hierarchy of ranking system for classifying organisms that is the basis for modern taxonomy. For this reason, he is considered to be the father of modern taxonomy. Here he goes, Carlos Linnaeus, who was in mid 1700th century, and he gave us the modern classification system, which was more accurate than the system of Aristotle. According to the Linnaeus classification system, he used an organism morphology, form and structures to categorize it. His system is still being used today because of his accuracy. His system allowed organisms to be grouped with similar organisms. He first divided all organisms into 2 kingdoms like Plantae and Animalia. Same was the classification method of Aristotle. These 2 categories were the main classification categories of Aristotle classification system. But here he used some more accurate things, like the main thing was the morphological shape and structure of an organisms. On the basis of them, Linnaeus categorized organisms into different groups. and due to the accuracy of that system, the system of Carlos Linnaeus is people using it still now. Morphology. Taxonomists study an organism's morphology and compare it to other living organisms. So in morphology, we have two types of characteristics. One are homologous features or characteristics, and the other one is analogous characteristics or features. So homologous features are important, but it is important to separate features that are truly homologous with those the same homologous but are actually analogous. Like if we see on the diagram, there are two types of characteristics. One are homologous and the other one are analogous. So if you can see the category of analogous shapes, the bat wing, butterfly wing and bird wings, they look like same, but their anatomy or anatomical features of them are different. So here is a problem in classification system, that there are some features or structures of organisms which maybe look homologous, but actually they are analogous. And on the above diagram, you can see the homologous structure of different animals like bat wings, mouse forelimb and human arm. They are homologous to each other. So the more homologous features two organisms share, the more closely related they are thought to be. Chromosomes and macromolecule. So classification systems also based on the categories or categorization of DNA, are the sequence of nucleotides in a DNA, RNA and the kind of protein those organisms have. So scientists compare amino acid sequence for homologous protein molecules of different species. The number of amino acid differences a clue to how long ago two species diverged from shared evolutionary ancestors. So we animals, we have 20 different types of amino acids in us, and these 20 different types of amino acids synthesize thousands, hundreds and thousands of proteins. So the same kind of proteins two organisms share, the more they will be closely related to each other. And if the amino acid sequence is more different from one another of two species, then they will be considered to diverge from a shared evolutionary ancestor long ago. So these proteins and amino acids, these are the basis for what they are brought forward, or they are synthesized from the DNA and RNA of an organism. Like RNA, it bring messages from DNA, and then in the cytoplasm or on the ribosomes, they manufacture those proteins. So the protein sequences also relate to the common structures or shapes of the DNA of an organisms. So chromosomes and macromolecules, they are also used for the classification purpose, to classify organisms whether they are closely related to each other or not. The 7 criteria which are generally used for the classification of the DNA that are include the number of nucleotides, the location of genes, and the nucleotide sequences. Chromosomes and molecules. Biologists also compare the karyotype of patterns of chromosomes of two related species. Karyotype means the arrangement of chromosomes in an organism. So the regions of chromosomes that have the same pattern of bending are clues to the relatedness of organisms. So if the chromosome shapes or the pattern of chromosomes are similar to each other of two species, the more there are chances to be the relatedness of those organisms with each other. The chromosomes of humans and chimpanzees show a surprising degree of similarity. Modern system, a nested hierarchy, 7 levels of organization. So the modern systems there are 7 levels of categories of classification, that are kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, and genus and species. So to remember that these categories, you have to remember this formula. It's a simple sentence: King Philip came over for grandma's soup. And remember the first word, the underlined words of each letter of each word, then you will know the classification system. Classification hierarchy of organisms. Here are three examples of organisms, and in this picture they classify them. Like for example, the kingdom Animalia, bobcat and lion, they relate to the same kingdom. Phylum Chordates, both are the same. Class, for both it's the same, Mammalia. Order Carnivora and Carnivora, again both are the same. Family Felidae and Felida, both are the same. The genus Lynx and Panthera. So there is a difference in between the genera or the genus of those two species, like lion and bobcat. Bobcat relate to the genus Lynx and lion relates to the genus Panthera. And species Lynx rufus and Panthera liu. So the shaggy mane mushroom, it's different from them because it's related to kingdom fungi. Here is the classification of modern humans. In the first category, the kingdom, you can see the huge number of organisms because it's all animals are included in them. And as we go to the smaller degree of classification, the number of individuals become lesser, and at the end, in the species, just us, our humans are related, are involved. It's the classification for cheetah. The binomial nomenclature. It's the two-word naming system, and the names are in Latin or ancient Greek words because these are the dead languages and nobody are using them nowadays. So for all scientists of the world, these names are, this language is acceptable because it's a dead language and nobody is using it now. The first word of the scientific name, the species name, is the name of the genus to which the organism belongs. The genus name refers to the relatively small group of organisms to which a particular type of organism belongs. The second word of the name is the species identifier. The species name is usually a Latin description of some important characteristics of the organism. The rules for writing scientific names. When we use the Latin name for an organism, we always capitalize the genus, the first part, but not the species identifier or the second part of the name. We also print the name in italics or underline them. For example, Acer rubrum, the scientific name of the red maple tree. Okay, so it is underlined. Either you can write it in italic format or you have to underline it. Acer is the Latin name for maple, that is the genus, and rubrum is the Latin word for red, which is the species name, or the name can be abbreviated as A. rubrum. Humans are named as Homo sapiens, Homo because of our large brain and upright posture, and sapien because of our intelligence and ability to speak. Thank you.